Hi. Hello, hello, hello. My name is Shane Brody. I'm a trans man. I'm traveling around the country talking to trans, agender, neutrois, non-binary, gender non-conforming, intersex people, etc. And we talk about beliefs and identity and kind of the place where people are and what's happening there. Like, for instance, the anti-trans bills. Currently, we are in a central state here in America, and it's a very hot day out, so I'm sweating a little bit. I'm from Alaska, so I'm used to a little bit colder weather. We're in a really great little church basement here. There's all kinds of things going on, and I gotta say, I've said this before, I've done interviews before in churches. I love it when I see a little bit of messiness in a church basement and like kids art, and this place is full of that, and I love it. I also noticed that there were posters up about pronouns and that sort of thing, which I think is really proactive and very welcoming of trans people. Anyway, I'm going to turn it over to my guest for a second, and she's going to introduce herself.
Hi, I am I'm a local member of this church. I am a practicing pagan. I'm a trans woman. I have been I've been living my authentic self for pretty much the entirety of my adult life, and I don't know where to go from there. Please ask me questions.
Okay. Since you're a pagan, what is your relationship to this church? That might interest some people there.
As this is a Unitarian Universalist church, there is a lot of variety in belief. We do not share a single creed or religious doctrine or a specific scripture. In fact, just this morning, we heard from people who were more Buddhist, and they talked about their experience in relating Buddhism to environmentalism in regards to climate change, and that was our service we had this Sunday morning. But I, like a lot of other niche spiritual groups, have their own subgroup within the church. So I'm a member of the National Covenant of Unitarian Universalist Pagans, which is also...
I've heard of that. It's CUPS, right?
Yes, CUPS.
Yes. Uh-huh. Yeah.
So, and I'm a member of that, but I also operate out of our local group in our local church here.
Okay. So, do you have any relationship to the national one? Do you do anything with them? Do you have like conferences or something like that?
We haven't in a long time. In fact, like the UU church as a whole has been much more COVID precautious than society at large. And it's only recently that we are starting to, that you'll see that the majority of our community is, well, vaccinated and unmasked. And this is, the middle of 2023. And it's only getting to that point. Last year, half the people in our congregations, if they even came in person, were wearing masks.
Yeah.
So we're very precautious of that. So a lot of things that we previously had for ministries, for small groups, for conferences and other things, those are put on the wayside because of the pandemic, which is understandable. A lot of people...
Where did you have some services via like teleconferencing or something like that?
Our services are currently all hybrid.
Oh,
so
great.
any person for our main services can come in on Zoom and watch and participate partially in the services. So we have that, and a lot of our larger groups also have hybrid meetings as well. Sometimes they were virtual only during the pandemic, which made sense.
Yeah.
But we've transitioned.
I bet that was a hard transition from being in person and having a lot of contact, like a lot of fellowship and meals and, kids being able to play with each other and access the library here, and then to suddenly not have that. That
Yeah.
must have been hard.
Yeah, especially for the smaller niche groups.
Yeah.
We really struggled because if the mainline church itself is struggling, the niche spiritual groups that
Right.
are a subset of the church, we have our own issues, and they threw all of our schedules out the window. And yeah.
Were you able to have telemeetings with them as well, like with other pagans?
Yeah, and we still do the hybrid meetings for our business meetings
Okay.
as well, but um, we kind of they developed a weekly Zoom virtual only fellowship chat to kind of
Okay.
remediate what you were talking
Sure.
about.
Sure.
Um,
What's the makeup of this place, by the way? Just generally, is it does it skew a little bit older? Are the demographics kind of widespread, like younger people and middle-aged people and older people?
to quote my spouse, this church is heavily cis het white,
Okay.
and generally older and more affluent.
Okay. Yeah.
So we do have an older skew to us,
Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah. I've worked for churches that are probably similar to this. Yeah. So, with that being the case, it being white, affluent, cisgendered, and straight, was it kind of a struggle to kind of recognize subgroups within the church? I know that UU tends to be very, very welcoming, but even with that sort of welcoming and affirming language, sometimes there's still things to work on.
Yes. In fact, we just concluded a 6-week intensive workshop specifically about how trans and gender non-conformity and gender diversity essentially intersects with trying to actually make a true place for them in the congregation. And
Wow, that's really proactive. That's great.
yeah, I appreciate it a lot. And there were conflicts.
Yeah.
And part of that workshop literally was supposed to breed conflict.
Yeah.
Because you can't resolve, long-seated differences and maybe biases without having, some elbows, get knocked here and
Right.
there.
Or those issues just coming to the surface. The ignorance or the bias or just strange ideas that are out there. Yeah, about trans people.
At the end, the facilitators who we were following along with a much larger kind of curriculum that had been put
Okay.
together by queer and trans UU individuals.
Okay, great. I was going to ask if that was like a national effort. So, yeah.
It wasn't a national specific
Okay,
effort, but it's being used nationally, if
Oh,
that
great.
makes sense.
Great.
So essentially, they literally had us look at our congregation and write what's above the surface and then what's below the surface. And a lot of stuff came out, like gatekeeping, like tokenism, like the tendency to be very financially motivated and
Yeah, neoliberalism.
cliquey. Yeah.
Yeah. So, in a rather well-to-do church, how do you deal with that in terms of like class issues? Because sometimes that can be quite a way to gatekeep, like going to events and that sort of thing.
We discussed that because currently there's some large fundraisers from the church, and one of the fundraiser events,
Like capital, like fixing the building or something like that, or
I mean, we had that recently, but it
Okay.
was more of a transition back to the pre-COVID
Okay.
way of giving.
okay. So tithing, basically.
And we have events where basically congregants are offering to host events, specific niche events at their homes or other stuff, and then other congregates sign up and pay money, and all that money is donated to the church. The congregate that's hosting is basically donating their, indirectly by providing the service or
Right.
providing the event,
Right.
and then alternatively, the congregant who gets to go pays the money, and that money is donated to the church, and they've raised tens of thousands. But we literally discussed that in the workshop. Like, what about people who can't afford to go?
Yes. Yes.
How are we going to regard that? Because then they don't get that fellowship. They don't get to be part of those events, part of the.
Yes. And there, I've noticed too, there's less like social credit given to them. Like people who are able to give a lot, because they are wealthier or they have privilege, they're often thanked more for that, or they're given awards and that sort of thing. I've noticed even in my life, if I am going to go to an event, I often have to work, right? I have to serve people who have money to go to the event. So I often miss the event.
I feel that.
Yeah. Have you had that happen? Yeah.
In other parts of my life, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. This sounds like a great church, though. I mean, I'm looking around and there's some really great posters here. Fairness, caring, responsibility, respect. And there was also the pronoun posters. I'm really surprised at that, actually, the pronoun posters. Is that something that, like, kind of an affinity group within the church put up?
Yes and no. We had an affinity group which kind of made the main push for it, and this was started about almost a decade ago.
Okay.
But it's
So this is a long-standing conversation here.
Oh, it is. This church in particular was one of the first when this state legalized marriage equality to provide that service to queer couples.
Great.
So,
Yeah.
but trans inclusivity is a much more complicated discussion than just accepting marriage equality between flipping the sexual orientations and
Why do you think that, or why have you heard that it's more complicated?
I guess it's because it's easier for people to we all have different likes and dislikes, and it's a lot easier for people to accept that other people like different things, that other people are different things, are different people, are different genders, because I could like vanilla ice cream and you could like chocolate ice cream.
Sure.
And that's kind of how sexual orientation or romantic orientation goes.
Sure.
And then there's a difference when we look at ourselves and be like, I'm a coffee cup, and other people are like, no, you're a vase.
Okay.
Like, no.
Well, as you're describing that, though, I don't see that actually there's much of a difference from accepting like people being gay versus accepting people for being trans. What I see too is that the same sort of arguments or the same kind of tropes or discrimination is being put out there that I heard, 20, 30 years ago about gay people. It's like the exact same stuff. So I don't know. It seems strange that people are so upset about trans people.
I think it's because our society is so heavily gendered that because our society is so heavily gendered, trans people by mere existence shake that heavily based gender essentialism, which is kind of like a foundational core of our society, and they shake it to its very knees.
Yeah. Well, I mean, thinking about the history of at least the United States, we have had that discussion for a long time, though. I'm just thinking about like feminism, the various waves of feminism. Certainly the suffragettes, and then the second wave and third wave feminists have done that. They've kind of shaken society a bit. So I just think of this as an extension of that.
I mean, true. Unfortunately, it seems that to get a better and more fair society, the people who suffer by it not being a fair society kind of have to grab the reins and force society, drag it forward by the chains.
Yeah.
Kind of like, get over here.
Yeah. Yeah. It seems that way. It's almost like, I don't know, we're in this sort of sacrificial mindset or something like, and it's interesting with all these bills too. These bills are meant to punish trans people. Like they're not really improving society or they're not protecting anyone. They're just punishment. So it's a very strange time that we're in at the moment.
Yeah, as they say on a lot of the internet forums I'm a part of, the cruelty is the point.
Yes, the cruelty is the point. And if you're using political power to hurt people, I don't think your power is legitimate. Okay, so we took a little break, and my dog loved up my friend here. Yeah. He's a kisser. He loves to kiss people's hands and stuff. So I thought we would switch over, and maybe talk about you a little bit more personally, like about when you transitioned and your transition process and, maybe some relationships and how that worked.
I transitioned right, 18, 19. That was the kind of most pivotal year for me. And
are you talking about physical or social transitioning?
Well, that's complicated. It's more of when I became fully aware of who and what I was.
Okay.
So
earlier in the interview, you said something about being trans your whole adult life.
Yes.
How does that fit with that?
So my whole adult life, was really, you transition to adulthood 18, 19. I started the social transitioning when I was 18. I started hormones when I was 20 because that, it's a process to get done and get approval for. But the most, difficult part of all of that was also just kind of the internal reckoning because I'd always felt different in life.
Yeah.
But growing up, I had no idea why. And I did.
So you didn't have any language for it.
Oh, no, I didn't have the language. And I was raised very heavily sheltered in a very religious fundamentalist family.
Yeah. I was also in a very religious family that was isolated. Yeah.
Like my quintessential example from childhood that I share about this is I was put into a Christian private school when I was in elementary years.
Sure.
For financial reasons, my parents decided to try me out in public school in second grade. So I went to second grade public school, massive shock for me. I got in so much trouble from the teachers and also the students because, one, I lacked social skills, and two, I'd been so heavily sheltered that things that were offensive, like offensive gestures, I didn't know they were offensive gestures because I'd never been taught what, flipping someone off meant.
Oh, okay. So you were just really naive.
Extremely.
Okay, wow. That's pretty isolated. Yeah.
Yeah. I remember we were all having a classroom game and we were counting down from 3. And I was like, wouldn't it be fun if, I counted down and left the middle finger for 1?
Oh,
no. And I had no clue what that meant. And then afterwards I got pulled out by my teacher, and my teacher is just like, why are they telling me you did XYZ and you flipped them off? I'm like, I don't even know what that means. I ended up just crying and bawling there, and my parents had to come and explain, they actually don't know any of that stuff. Like,
oh, okay. Wow. That's pretty sheltered. That's that's one of the most sheltered stories I think I've heard so far. Do you think that maybe being in a religious school kind of contributed to that a little bit?
It did and it didn't. I was always kind of more the intellectual pushing the bounds of what they taught, because I remember my third grade textbook, which literally said, no one has any idea how electricity works, but here's a Bible verse about the moon.
Oh no.
Yes, it was one of
Oh
those.
no. Oh no. That's what I worry about with charter school funding instead of funding public schools, because at least in public schools there's a respect for science, there's a respect for history and facts and that sort of thing, and I worry about kids who go just to religious schools when they're younger because they aren't exposed to that sort of thing, so.
I was also socially isolated because of the way the birthdays fell determined who was in what grade.
Oh, really? Okay. Yeah.
So,
like if you're born earlier in the year versus later in the year.
Yep.
Yeah.
If you're born earlier, at the time you came in, you'd go to, kindergarten, or if you're born later, you go to preschool. Mm-hmm. So I was born the early part of the year, and so I got stuck with the class, which was all cis girls and me.
Okay.
For pretty much my entire time there. And I kind of always wanted to be one of the girls, if that made sense, but it's kind of because I was. I mean, that's not really a very cis thought, is it? Me, assigned male at birth, I want to be one of the girls. I wish I would have realized that sooner.
Oh, yeah. Well, I think that's pretty common among trans people. I remember for myself, I would always play really roughly with the boys, and I was really small and I would get hit a lot, yeah. Almost the girl experience was almost alien to me, and other girls I think felt like that too. They were like, what are you doing here, when I would try to join in.
Yeah, I was just really awkward at all the way around, because as the only, boy, air quotes, the private school fathers told all the cis girls to stay away from me.
Oh no! And they comprised your whole class.
Pretty much, yes.
Wow.
Especially considering a lot of them were very well-to-do. Like you see them on the large corporate retail for sale signs now.
Okay. CEOs or executives and okay, I see.
Large real estate groups, people who have the money and don't want some random neophyte like me.
Okay. So you were an isolated growing up in a religious family and working class. Yeah. Coming in to a rather wealthy setting in school. That's interesting. So you felt very isolated. And now your peers who you grew up with their faces are on signs all over the place because they're business women.
Well, they're not on signs, but you gotta understand that this is patriarchal, Christianity.
Sure.
That their brothers' faces are on the signs.
Okay.
They're married off to other rich Christian men.
I see. So they're the doting wives of the executives.
Except for two of them, which I know are happily lesbian.
Okay. There you go. We are everywhere.
Yes.
In your class, there was a trans woman. And also some lesbians.
Yes.
There you go. So you have this rather isolated childhood. How did the rest of your schooling go?
So I got dumped into, sixth grade, started middle school, into public school with no real social experience. Okay. And it was hell, because I did not know I used to cry to my parents when I was little because I felt like I had no friends and no one loved me. And because of that, I always wanted to make friends, but I was still so heavily awkward that and no one, knew me from elementary school. And so I was just this newcomer who just kind of like transferred in.
Sure.
And so I went through a lot of bullying.
Yeah. That sounds like a really tough situation. Yeah.
Yeah, I went through a lot of bullying in middle school and in the beginning years of high school until I eventually was able to become, I don't know how it happened, but I was eventually able to kind of like worm my way into being like everyone's like not really accepted, but they expected me to be around, so they stopped
Okay.
giving me, so much grief.
Okay.
And this was also around the heyday of when social media started to kick off. And adolescent me was a camera fiend. I had an actual like dedicated camera, 20 times optical zoom.
Okay. So one of those big ones.
Yeah. And I took pictures of everyone at the football games,
Okay.
and then they were all always like begging me to like upload them, tag them, so they could get their, adolescent social media clout.
Yes. I could see how you were working that.
Yeah, and they kind of started to accept me a little more, and so I kind of did that until things got less.
That's funny because you were. It was almost like you were making them more popular. Yeah.
Yes.
That's funny. When I was in grade school, what I did was, this is before social media. This is before the internet and all that. I would. Do you need to take a break there?
No.
Okay. Okay. So that's interesting because when I was a kid, this was before social media. This was before the internet. This was even before digital cameras. This is still like film cameras. I was doing the yearbook. And it was the same thing. Like I would go around and I would ask different groups of kids if I could, take pictures of them for the yearbook. And some of them were really into it, and they would pose for me and stuff. And, when I had to collate the yearbook, I would place them just right. And so I kind of did the same thing. And it helped me to be more connected to the other students. Yeah.
I had that same thing. Our yearbook and our student newspaper were managed by the same teacher who oversaw both of them. And so they knew I was a camera fiend. They ended up getting me a field pass for the football fields for my junior and senior year. And so, and all my pictures were given to them at the end of the year, and you can see them through both yearbooks, and just they even put them on the website at the time. And they were on the website until like just a few years ago. But
I really love those old pictures. It really I feel like it really connects me to my childhood to see some of those photographs of my friends and that sort of thing, because I don't live in the same place where I grew up, so it's nice for me.
Absolutely.
Did you grow up here, by the way?
Yeah, I was born here, and I've been born and raised here.
Okay.
Never lived anywhere else.
Okay. Yeah, we've had the exact opposite life than for that, because I've moved a lot. So, thinking about trans issues, or maybe even the paganism that you mentioned earlier, when does that come up? Was that part of your life when you were a younger person?
No. So, well, it was, but then it wasn't. So I've always had this very deep connection with nature on a spiritual sense. And it was what gave me peace, is what, where I found meaning, where I found joy, where I found beauty.
Yeah, me too.
And because of that, I pursued that a lot, and that's actually where I got my start with photography, is nature photography. I gotta go show you after we're done with the interview a very beautiful place near here.
Okay, well, I can tell. I mean, so when I pulled up to this church, I was like, this is an oasis, right? Because there's really big trees around it, and it's like almost you're in a little gully here. It's really nice. I mean, you can see that in the background here. It's forested around it, but all around us, it's pretty urban. Yeah.
My dad, he was fiercely independent because he grew up in a very hard, very low working class life.
Was that here in the city?
No, it was in the state, but it was in on one of the borders of the state where he grew up.
Okay.
So he told all of us that, when you become 14, you can decide whether or not you come to church anymore.
Okay.
Though he was still going to heavily pressure or encourage us to attend his church, he wasn't going to force us anymore.
Yeah, well, that's great. It's terrible to be forced into something. So, yeah.
So at that time, I started going through, what do I really believe?
Yeah.
Like
well,
a lot
that's
of
interesting that
adolescents.
we're in a UU place too, because that's what UU does. They allow younger people to kind of explore their spirituality.
Yeah, in fact, last week's service was our coming of age service.
Oh, great.
And we literally had 5 of the 14-year-olds coming of age, basically saying, this is our faith statement. And the majority have said them, I believe in being nice, but I'm not sure I believe in a God.
Okay.
And hearing that at any other church would be scandalous.
Yeah.
Impermissible.
Right.
So, as a lot of adolescents do, I started soul searching.
Yeah.
And and at the same time, I also realized a lot of assumptions that I had made about the entire world was wrong, and nothing lined up. And so I realized,
I think that continues throughout life, because I'm in my 50s now, and I'm like, wow, there's so many things that I have made assumptions about that just are not true, and I'm changing my mind about so many things.
So basically, I had to throw out everything my parents taught me. And so
Or reevaluate. Yeah.
I literally decided to start from like square one and like build myself up from base metaphysics and metaethics.
Okay.
And kind of like,
Did you do a lot of reading?
No, not at the beginning. At the beginning,
Okay.
I didn't want to. I felt it would be improper to let any outside sources tell me because I wanted to know what I felt,
Sure.
what I thought.
Sure. Did you do like a lot of meditating or walking and
A lot of thinking, and because of that, I eventually came to my conclusions, and I went into such a deep depression when I realized how far reality was from what I had been brought up with.
Why did that make you depressed though?
Because my parents raised me with a fantasy land of God and angels, and we are in the end times, and demons, and we're fighting the last days and all this other stuff. And what I had been told my entire life was a lie, and because of that, it broke me inside. And it took a long time for me to adjust to applying what I now knew to be true, or at least a lot more true than what I had been told.
Sure.
And so I rebuilt my grades. Like, I always sat at a low to high A, depending on the grade level. And I remember that 10th grade, I got D's across the board because I was so depressed, and the grades didn't matter to me. I needed to figure out what life was worth living for.
Yeah.
And
so it sounds like you were kind of like in recovery almost. Yeah. That's interesting.
And I eventually built myself up back to I was so happy by my senior year of high school that I was actually interested in going to college. I was actually interested in doing things. I became the editor of our student newspaper.
Is that when you went into paganism at that time?
No, I explored paganism. I wasn't exploring it consciously or overtly. I did a lot more of, hey, I would just go out into little nature areas and and basically do my meditation or my connect with the environment thing.
Yeah.
But I didn't think of it consciously as paganism. So now
Okay.
that we're talking about it, it kind of makes sense that I kind of was flirting with that, but I didn't know what I was really doing.
It just came kind of naturally to you.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. I noticed, so as an adult, I have explored paganism kind of more formally, like there's groups out there. And unfortunately, I also noticed that there's some essentialism in there.
Oh, yes.
Yes. So men are men, women are women, and this is what men do, and this is what women do. And sometimes they heavily gender things that don't need to be gendered. And they also take various gods or god concepts and try to make them very macho where they aren't. Like, for instance, Odin in the Norse mythology was a shapeshifter and sometimes would present himself as female, among other things. And so it's just interesting. Like, there's this sort of...
Did you mean Loki?
Loki too, but also Odin. But within those circles, sometimes there's kind of this, sometimes people call it toxic masculinity. I don't really use that term all that much, but it's almost like they are trying to make it male dominated, whereas, there was a lot of gender fluidity. And also, like Odin, for instance, I'm just using this as an example, went to the Norns, which were female at a well, to gain knowledge, right? So it's not just about, male domination and fighting and drinking beer or whatever. It's actually very egalitarian and gender fluid. Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of those kinds of acid truth folks don't like the fact that in the sagas Odin was said to practice Sador, which is specifically considered a feminine magical practice.
Right. Yes, exactly.
I struggle with the opposite. So Norse heathenry, Asatru, all of that, Odin, sometimes called Odinism, especially the sensationalist versions.
Yes. Let's just say it, racist.
Yes, the racist versions.
The neo-Nazis. Yeah.
Yes. Those are often, they use the term Odinism.
Odinism, yeah.
They tend to be extremely male dominated.
Yes.
Or at least cis male dominated. But the general New Age and pagan and Wiccan circles outside of everything else, which are the predominant neo-pagan groups, they are heavily cis female.
Yes.
Yes. And
some are even like only cis female as well.
Dianic circles.
Yes, Dianic circles. Which I'm imagining can be harmful for a trans woman who wants to enter those spaces.
Oh, you can't enter those spaces.
Yeah.
In fact, we even had an issue almost a decade ago where, almost a decade ago. I feel old. Where there was a...
How old are you?
I am almost 30.
Okay. I'm in my early 50s, so
you don't look it.
I just gotta laugh at you.
So we had an issue where, while the main group we have that's an extension of the UU is required to be inclusive to all people, they had a de facto women's group, which was technically a private event, but in reality it was just the women's subgroup of the overall group.
I see.
And so they set up a specific goddess women singing circle, which specifically said women born women only, and we're very exclusionary. And unfortunately, we've suffered with a lot of we still try to root out that exclusivity in our own local group to this day. and because we recently had a big schism in our local chapter, and part of it was that.
Yeah.
I can understand why they're so heavily, as a lot of the spaces are so heavily protective and so insular, because I do realize that, the 70s and 80s, for a lot of the women that were, the cis women that were coming of age then, it was not nearly as equal as it is now.
Right. Yeah, you look at old commercials like on TV. Oh, so sexist. Like, yeah.
And I realized that they had to fight and scrape for every ounce of, and so I can understand it's almost like a generational trauma almost that they're carrying of, we had to be so exclusionary just to survive back in the more patriarchal, not even allowed to have bank accounts era.
Yeah. But the problem is that when you use that and then you hurt other people.
Exactly.
Right? Who should be welcomed in.
Yeah.
Right?
And I think that's part of what we're dealing with right now is that we're literally transitioning, because a lot of the women who were young, women then.
You're talking about second wave feminism here.
Well, yeah. Now we're in the third and fourth wave. But not only that, we're seeing a broadening of the circle, because for a lot, I mean, if you develop a really nice coven, a very nice, or a circle or a pagan group, if you guys know each other and you're younger, you could go for decades, if you all stay in the same area,
right,
and you all get along, and no one ever, nothing changes. It's always the same liturgy, always the same people, always the same.
That sounds really boring, though.
I mean, I can understand that. I definitely don't disagree.
Especially if we're talking about upper class, cis, het, white women just being part of something and, being very exclusive. I think if that demographic matches you, you have to really rethink what you're doing if you are gatekeeping.
Oh, I completely understand.
Yeah, because you're probably not just gatekeeping trans women.
Yeah, in fact, throughout the 80s and 90s, there was lots of infighting among the feminists and also this happened in the more progressive pagan spaces and new age spaces as well, where you'd have the lesbian cis women who would be squaring off against the straight cis women, who they obviously had a lot of disagreements there, and
let's take a break here for a moment because that just turned on.
Yeah.
Let's just wait till it goes off. So let's just take a break.
Yeah, and get a.
It's pretty loud.
Yep.
Okay, so we took another break, and my dog chased a rabbit, which was not good, but I understand, buddy. I understand why he did that. Anyway, I had to go get him. And okay, so we were talking a little bit about Dianic Wicca and how it can be very exclusionary to trans women and probably other women as well, other kinds of women. And I was wondering if you were what kinds of paganism you were actually involved in.
So,
because there's so many different kinds.
I would be defined as an eclectic pagan.
I would be too.
The difficulty is that, unlike my spouse, who was formally trained in a Wiccan coven, and actually went through initiation and all that,
right? Because there's lineages of this. Yeah.
I kind of came to my own experience and had to kind of piece it together on my own, which is really a lot of what I did after, after high school. Not only was I was being my more authentic self, and I was finally accepting my, my femininity, my womanhood, and moving in that transitionary path. I also began admitting the pagan, the witchy part of me, which has always been a part of me, but accepting myself in my gender regard helped me accept myself in my spirituality, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. I've also heard that spirituality can help bolster a person to have courage or to have hope about being trans as well, or going through that transition.
Generally, compared to a lot of Christianity, paganism tends to be a bit more liberal, a bit more progressive. But there's always exceptions to the rule.
Yeah.
And so I mostly came on to it, completely on my own. I really didn't have much of a group or other practitioners I studied with.
Yeah.
There were people I periodically would intermingle with, but it wasn't a regular thing.
Yeah. That's what's so nice about how welcoming UU is, especially CUPS. What does CUPS stand for again?
Covenant of Unitarian Universalist Pagans.
And that's national. That's all over the country.
Yep.
And so that's so nice that they actually create space for that. And I do realize it is very eclectic. So it's not just one tradition, which is cool too, because that fits you, right? Because you've kind of been on your own journey.
Well, most people who practice or believe in certain religions or spiritual paths or traditions aren't really familiar with how they developed. So modern neo-paganism pretty much took off in the early 1900s. And it is a syncretist faith. It is a combination of lots of elements from other faiths.
Yes.
But there's also the reconstructive element, because there are specific cultures out there which certain groups are trying to reconstruct, like the Norse heathens are trying to reconstruct Norse beliefs, and then there's the Celtic reconstructionists which try to reconstruct the Celtic beliefs. And
right, because there's a big gap in knowledge there because of Christian hegemony, basically.
So, but Wicca, which is the most commonly known of the neo-pagan traditions, is explicitly syncretist. It is not a monolith, but it did start very insular. It did start very gender essentialist, but at the same time, it also started very sexually permissive, and willing to explore things which mainstream, Christian-dominated society were not very accepting of. So in some cases they weren't inclusive. In other cases they were inclusive for their time in the early 1900s.
Yeah.
And
so we're talking over 100 years ago. Okay.
The 30s and 40s are when British traditional Wicca really started taking off.
I see.
And this is where you see Gardnerian witchcraft.
I was going to bring up that name. Yeah.
And then as it migrated across the pond, as the British like to say,
Yes.
the establishment of Wiccan covens in the United States started to change everything. And then you had developments of other Wiccan flavors, like there's the Alexandrian flavor that came out, and a lot of the other offshoots that came from that, and the other traditions that developed.
So you're not in a particular lineage. You kind of study a lot of things, and it sounds like what you kind of like, what resonates with you is what you practice.
Pretty much.
Yeah, because as you said, some people go through apprenticeships with particular people.
Yeah. Specific covens, specific high priestesses and high priests.
Yeah.
And whether or not it's led by a high priest or a high priestess or both is heavily dependent on your tradition.
Yeah.
I follow more of intuitive witchcraft and intuitive paganism, in which case I kind of like feel what the environment and the energy of the earth is around is kind of saying to me, and then I do it.
Okay.
Like early this morning, I woke up early this morning, and so I decided to come down here early before service.
Yeah.
And I got one of my big bowls, and I burned a lot of incense, resin, and plants in our labyrinth pretty early in the morning, just on my own, just because I felt that's what I should do. And I did that, and I did my own little ritual spell, whatever you want to call it, down there.
I love it when people kind of feel in the moment and then do their kind of own ritual practice, make sacred space around them. Yeah, I met somebody in Houston that does that. They go into bar situations, and then create sacred space in there. And you'd think, in a bar? That seems really strange. It's a very, maybe even a crass, kind of harmful kind of place. But they bring the church there. They bring their interesting eclectic spirituality there, and they create a sacred space. And I think that's possible in a lot of places, as long as you're there and you're doing it.
No, I think especially if you're talking about queer spaces, like queer bars, I have in the past set up shop and did tarot and oracle reading.
Right.
And I never charge. I accept free will tips if someone decides like they want to buy me a drink or something.
Sure.
But I never charge because I don't believe in charging for spiritual practice.
Yeah.
I that's abhorrent to me.
Yeah. It's a little strange.
Spirituality is about something different than the exchange of money and resources.
Well, I think of it as something that's available to everyone. So why have something that mitigates that relationship, whether that's people or harmful doctrine sometimes, or money? Why even deal with that stuff? Do a direct connection instead.